Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Hawke. I lead the Security, Privacy, and Compliance program at Everlaw. Everlaw is a Series B legal technology startup, and we are in the B2B SaaS space. And so the reason I'm here today is because security questionnaires, vendor security reviews, and the enterprise security assessment has been a big part of my life for the last 3.5 years, at least at work. So I'm here today to hopefully share some of the learnings that I've experienced over the last 3.5 years and some of the things that I think that have helped Everlaw pass these types of security reviews as we've grown from 25 people when I joined the company to around 180 right now, and as we've increased our presence in the enterprise space. And so I've broken this talk into 3 parts. There are a lot of resources out there on enterprise security reviews and vendor questionnaires, and so hopefully I can build on that material that's out there, a lot of it from the Heavybit community, with, again, some of the learnings from Everlaw over the past 3 years. And so part 1. So you may notice a theme here. It's partially because I'm a big nerd, but it's also because when I thought about preparing this and getting through a vendor security assessment and the questionnaire process, it sort of resonated. The story of Lord of the Rings and the journey really resonated with me. Also, I just spent 2 weeks in Middle-earth touring around New Zealand, so it's fresh in my mind. But for part 1 of this talk, I'm focusing on what's at stake for your company and how you should approach it, or some ideas for how you can approach it. Because in order to sell software or products and services to enterprises in the B2B space, you are going to have to go through some type of procurement process. And increasingly, it involves a big focus on security and as well as privacy, I'm seeing. So the first thing I think it's important to think about as you're entering this sort of phase as a company is your business context. So when you get to the point where you're trying to sell to an enterprise, your business context is going to be really important, and it can mean a few things. So the first thing I like to think about is your product. So what is it? Are you collecting data? If so, what type of data is that? Are you storing it? Are you processing it? At Everlaw, like I said, we're a B2B SaaS product. Our platform is a litigation platform, and our clients upload lots of documents, files of all types, and we host it in our platform while they're using our service. And so that involves a lot of sensitive documents, a lot of confidential documents. So for us, that's a big part and a big focus of the vendor security process. Whereas there's a lot of folks in this room, and your product may not have a need to collect any data, or maybe that data collection or capture is ephemeral. And so those things are important because they're going to come into play during that vendor security review. Another thing to think about is, what does selling to enterprise mean to you? Your go-to-market strategy for selling to enterprises could be really different from other founders in the room. So are you targeting specific verticals? Are those verticals regulated? Think about the financial industry or the healthcare industry, or does it involve government? And then the last one here is target jurisdiction. So where are you doing business? Are you only in the US, or have you already expanded into other regions like Europe or APAC? Because again, those types of considerations will come into play when you are being assessed by the target enterprises that fit into those types of categories. So it's important to understand this business context, even if you're small and earlier stage, and even if some of these pieces of the puzzle are still in flux for you. And the reason that is because it's going to come into play when you're trying to figure out how to build your security program and sort of what framework you can apply. And I put a couple of examples up here. I mean, everybody's heard of ISO, you've heard of SOC. At Everlaw, when I joined the company, we were only 25 people, and I was the first one in on the security, privacy, or compliance side. And so I picked a different framework, which not a lot of people are too familiar with, but the Department of Justice's guidelines on an effective compliance program, which you might think is a little odd. But because the company, we were so early and the company was not that big, I actually needed something much broader. So we've heard today about how culture is important in security, and we've also heard about how important it is to build security into your business thinking. So because we were so small, I needed a program framework that would help me stand up an enterprise risk program, a code of conduct, as well as the broader business type things that you need when you're building a company, as well as security. And using that framework really helped me at that stage, again, when we were less than 30 people, really embed sort of a risk framework mindset amongst the company, as well as a security mindset, and start the seeds for that security culture. So what I'm getting at here is, if you don't understand what your business context is and sort of what kind of enterprises you're targeting and what the factors are that are going to impact you, it's harder to decide what kind of framework you might want to choose. You know, if you're later stage, or if you're a more established company and you're standing up your security program, it might make a lot more sense to focus on, you know, the ISO 27001 or the SOC 2 Type 2, or the frameworks that are a bit more focused on security. So now that, you know, I showed you SOC 2, you're thinking, but wait, do I need to get that certification? And if so, when do I need to get it? And I'll get into that in a second, but first I just wanted to touch a little bit on the certification versus compliance assessments. And you might think this is a bit splitting hairs, but I think it's an important distinction to make because it ties back to that business context. So depending on the types of enterprises that you're targeting in your strategy, you may need to also think about regulatory compliance. And I know that some folks today have already touched on this, but it's something to consider as you're building out your security program, because regardless of whether you decide to pursue a certification or not, depending on your business context, regulatory compliance might be really important to you. And I'll give you an example. So at Everlaw, we do not collect protected health information. Like I said, we sell software, we sell a SaaS platform. But part of our strategy is to sell to large enterprises, and some of those enterprises are insurance companies. And insurance companies may deal with protected health information that they need to upload into the platform to use our service for. Or we may sell to a large law firm that's representing a hospital in some type of malpractice case. So for us, we have to think about HIPAA because it makes us a business associate, even if we're not the ones collecting that protected health information. So regardless of sort of the security certification strategy we might adopt, we still have to think about HIPAA when it comes to privacy and security. And it's worth pointing out that there are some regulatory regimes or frameworks that don't even offer a certification. And I think there are a lot of consultants out there that will sell you any certification that you call them up and ask for. But it's worth pointing out that, for example, HIPAA, it's the Office of Civil Rights in HHS, they don't actually recognize a formal HIPAA certification. However, you can engage either a consultant or an auditing firm if you have the appetite to have them come in and do a gap assessment or give you some independent assurance that your programs and controls do meet those requirements. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because sometimes those independent engagements or validations of your program from a regulatory standpoint can help you when you get to the enterprise security assessment with a company that really cares about HIPAA. So now you kind of understand the difference between a certification and a compliance assessment, but back to the certification, when should you do it? I don't think there's a great answer for that. I've heard some folks today talk about going through SOC 2 Type 2 and how that's really pushed them forward. When I started at Everlaw, they had already done a SOC 2 Type 1 in security and availability. So when I joined and was standing up the program, I pushed us to do a Type 2 and add confidentiality. And then over the past couple of years, we've continued with the Type 2 and also added the privacy criteria as well. So I'm not saying there's a great time to do a certification. It comes back to your business context in some cases, because there are some companies that you can sell to without having a certification, but it's going to be a lot harder if you have not stood up a holistic program that touches on things like your security governance, your policies and procedures, your training, and your operations. So you can proceed without certification, but some companies will require it as a gate, and sometimes it's a good catalyst to get the internal support you might need to really build out that program. All right, so now we're headed to Mordor. So you understand a little bit more about sort of getting ready for a security assessment, getting your program together, making sure it's holistic, and understanding your business context. But now you actually need to navigate through the assessment. So in this part, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the players and priorities and things that might happen during that assessment. Because this is what we don't want to happen. You don't want to do all of this work, build your program, and then get to the point where you're in sales conversations with an enterprise and be told you shall not pass. We don't want that. So how to navigate the security assessment. So some folks today have already touched on the security questionnaire, and I do know some folks in the room who deal with these. The fact is, they are a pain. I'm not going to mince words, but there are some things you can do that will help you prepare for them. Of course, building that holistic program as a start is the number one thing. But there are various questionnaires out there. These are a couple. So Cloud Security Alliance, the SIG. And one of the reasons that security questionnaires can be painful is because there really isn't a generalized industry standard. And a lot of times you may be presented with a questionnaire that the enterprise has been using for a very, very long time for on-premises IT solutions that they have in place, and you may think it doesn't really apply to you. So when it comes to the questionnaires, be aware that they're going to cover more than your product. You may be expecting to answer things that you would expect to be asked about a cloud B2B product, but you're probably going to be asked about things like personnel security. So do you have confidentiality agreements that all of your new hires sign during onboarding? Do you do background checks? Things like your incident response processes and your disaster recovery. So how long are you retaining backups? So just be aware that during this security assessment, the questionnaire is going to cover things that are much wider than just your technical product infrastructure, and that's why it's important for your program to be holistic. And then next, when you get to the point that you're having conversations, which may not happen. I mean, the best scenario is when you do the work and you fill out the questionnaire, and the next thing you know, you're getting a win notification from your sales team. That's the best. But more often than not, depending on what stage you are in your growth and how mature your program is, there's a good chance that you're going to have to be getting on the phone with folks at the company that you're trying to sell to. And that can vary pretty widely how that conversation goes, that is, depending on who's actually on the line. You could end up on the phone with a person in their procurement department who doesn't even really know what your product does. And in that case, you need to be ready with your business context so that you can explain to them what your solution is, talk about your program as a whole, and make sure that they understand that you do have a security program, you do have dedicated personnel, and you are covered. You also want to make sure that if that conversation happens, that you have the right folks in the room on your side, because maybe you're talking directly to their security team. And if you know that they've already raised a concern about an aspect of your either corporate security infrastructure or maybe something related to your product, you want to make sure that you have the folks in the room that can speak to your controls in place, whether they be the exact control that the prospect is looking for, or it may be a compensating control where you do something else and you need to convince them that that meets their bar. And when it comes to addressing gaps, be ready with your roadmap, because a lot of times you will have gaps and there may be things in that questionnaire that you answered no to that they're looking for a yes, and that's okay. You shouldn't be afraid of that. You should be ready to talk about your program as a whole, your roadmap, and how you can address their concerns even if you're not addressing the exact control that they're looking for. So now that you have a better idea of sort of what the assessment involves and some of the pain points, you're probably thinking, well, who's going to do all this work? And we've heard some great comments from other presenters today. You know, you want to be able to leverage folks on other teams, especially on the sales team. If you've got sales engineers that can answer these for you, that's great. But if you're really small, you may be thinking, well, I don't really have a security team, or I don't have people in the organization that are knowledgeable enough to help me do this. So I have a few thoughts on what I think makes some traits of people that might already be on your team or people that you can hire to help you do this kind of work. So I think of them as GRC folks. And someone else here mentioned today about culture. And when I think of security GRC, this is about building a holistic approach in your organization and your program with the ultimate goal of creating that culture of security. And these are sort of the flag bearers in my mind for that work and really embedding that culture. And at Everlaw, this is the team that run point on all of our vendor security questionnaires. And we only recently started calling this team GRC. I mean, it was just ME for a very long time, until pretty recently. So I understand that if you're earlier stage, you probably don't have a GRC team. But that doesn't mean that there aren't people on your team or in your organization that can do this kind of work. And so if you're working on identifying somebody on your team, there's a few traits that I think, whether they're in security or not, make them a good fit. And I did a talk about this recently, and I know there's some folks in the room who listen to me, so I'm just going to give you a brief snippet of that, but I'm going to give you my top 3. And the first one are risk sentinels. So this is my term for people who I think are the ones that are really good at thinking of a situation or looking at a scenario or a question and thinking 3 or 4 or 10 steps ahead to the consequences of that answer or the consequences of that scenario. And this is important when you're dealing with vendor security questionnaires, because you need to have folks that are looking through the questions and they understand that if they answer yes to this question, that it's going to impact something else in the questionnaire, or it's going to impact how the prospect views your posture on that specific topic. The next one is curiosity. So I think personally that curiosity is a really good sign of people that are proactive, and you're going to need proactive folks to help with these vendor security questionnaires, because there's going to be a lot of hunting for answers and gathering information. And when somebody is curious and proactive, they're usually game to do that kind of work. And then the third one here is puzzlers. So puzzlers like to take messy things and put them in order. And these security questionnaires can be really puzzling depending on who's giving them to you. And so you want folks that are willing to sort of look at the big picture, look at that security questionnaire that you're thinking, well, this doesn't apply to us at all, but then be able to zoom back up to your business context and figure out a way to get that prospect the answers they want in the context that they're looking for so that they want to move ahead with your product. So speaking of spinning up the resources to be able to do this, there's a couple of things just to touch on based on sort of what stage you're in. So in an earlier stage company, you're definitely going to be in the building process where you're looking for folks, you're looking for resources, where if you're later stage, you're going to be much more in the maintenance and continuous improvement mode. Generalists versus specialists. Again, if you're earlier stage, you're probably going to have someone who's doing a bit of everything. So somebody who might be working on your security policies and procedures, also these vendor security assessments. Whereas when you get larger, and depending on the market you're in and the demand for your product, this could be somebody's full-time job at a certain stage. And then more money, more problems. So as you mature as a company, there are going to be additional considerations that you need to think about that will then impact the vendor security assessment process. So as you get much bigger, maybe you're subject to new regulations. So maybe that changes your business context a little bit. Or if you're just going really big and you're going after those Fortune 500s and the biggest companies out there, then if you want more money, then you should expect that when it comes to the security assessment questionnaires and the security assessment process, that you're going to have to go through some more hoops because they will expect more. But there are some benefits to this process. So I know it sounds like a lot of work, and it is, but I think it's worth pointing out that there are a lot of positive aspects that your company can or positive benefits your company can reap. And one, of course, is commercial. So that MRR you want, selling to those bigger companies, getting those deals. Another one is reputational. So being known as a vendor in your space that can get through these rigorous security assessments can be a good thing. Maybe that matters less to you, but if it matters more, being known as someone, a company that can actually pass this bar can be really useful and beneficial. But that's not to say that getting through a security assessment and being able to check a lot of boxes on a questionnaire means you have good security. I think we all agree that doing a security questionnaire is not going to tell anyone necessarily that you are 100% secure, because that doesn't exist. But my point is, if you've done all of the work to build a holistic program to show that you are able and set you up to be able to pass these things, that can translate into a stronger reputation around security. And then the last one is scaling. So I liked the focus on culture earlier, and the earlier that you can start building this holistic program and really get your folks on all teams thinking about security and how important it is to your commercial success, it will help you later on. Because if all the folks understand how important security is when you're only 25 people, when you're onboarding a lot of people and going through those hiring sprees, it will permeate the organization better, because you'll have that tribal knowledge and people will tell each other that it's important. So you won't always have to be the one telling everybody why security is important. So a couple of final thoughts here. Focus on the program. Keep the certifications in your mind, but really focus on your program. Make it holistic, focus on culture, and make sure that you're not just checking those boxes. And then when you have the questionnaire, the conversations as it relates to the assessments and questionnaires themselves, be as prepared as you can. Try to find out in advance what the prospect's concerns are, if there are any. If they've raised any flags to your salesperson, make sure you have that open line of communication with your salesperson so that you know before that call what they want to talk about, so that you can have the right people in the room. And then, be flexible and creative. There are going to be gaps. You are going to need to be ready with your roadmap. So get your sentinels, get your puzzlers, get your curious folks helping you with those compensating controls and being able to describe those. Thank you so much, and it was a pleasure. Thank you.